Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Appalachian Gorilla on Substack, and welcome back to Pnoid News. I'm here with my brother Copernican, right? And you know what I'm
Yep.
saying, known as listen, this dude invited me here, you know what I mean, because like he read some of my stuff and he wanted to have a conversation about some of my takes, and I want to discuss some of his. So, you know what I mean, how you doing today, my brother?
Hey, I'm doing great. So I think that we first met when you commented on one of my articles on Substack. I actually forget which comment it was now off the top of my head, but I believe that you were commenting sort of on the nature of um, morality and God and the way that's going to play a role going forward, sort of as civilization changes here in the next generation or so.
Oh man, listen, I don't even remember that far back to be perfectly honest with you. I wasn't sure whether it was that one or like the take on capitalism, like from being from like the 1450s. But yeah, like
We discussed capitalism after the initial contact point, I think.
okay, all right,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do find your take on capitalism interesting. So why don't you start with that? Capitalism in the 1450s.
All right, so but you got to go back to like how money actually like began, right? Like
Yeah,
money
yeah.
originally like started off to like solve blood feuds inside of like chieftains. Like our original, like the first writing that we have is about money and how like they break down land and things of this nature. And so money has always existed before everything else, and money was
Yeah, it's called a
always
unit of account.
yeah, money was set by like the leader or the king or whatever it was. So it was tied culturally to like your people. And when capitalism came along, it got divorced because there was a bunch of Portuguese sailors who found an island that was like uninhabited called Madeira. And they ended up like starting sugarcane plantations. And so they didn't have any workers because it was uninhabited. You know, I mean, this is like the first time in Europe that this has happened where you ended up having the commodification of land, labor, and money at the same time, right? Where like
Land,
basically
labor, and goods, I would argue.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
You can get all these like they had all these things that just kind of existed, or they all existed tied to something else, and at this point it was completely divorced. And they took this system and they put it, you know, what I mean, towards the colonies, and they, you know, what I mean, it ended up like they stripped it out to the point where it stopped being like profitable anymore. Moved it to Brazil, then moved it to the Caribbean, then you know, what I mean, it came to America, right? And that's the structure of like how capitalism exists. It's really good for colonial like settlement, but it's really shitty when it comes to like handling a nation and finances long term.
well, what I would argue is that the modern conception of capitalism, especially post-Keynesianism, because capitalism's taken on a few forms. So first you have the mercantilist form of capitalism, which was highly nationalist in its design, where nations would attempt to sell goods to foreign nations while buying as few goods from foreign nations as possible. And this allows the nation itself to accrue a large supply of capital in the form of a non-renewable resource. Generally speaking, that was gold. So the nations that ended up with the most gold became the most influential, and they did that by selling goods to foreign nations. This became a crucial problem for the British for a while because they would be buying tea at such unprecedented rates that in the British Empire, the British Empire was actually running out of silver buying tea from China, which is why they initiated the opium trade so that they could get their own silver back from China so that they could buy tea with it. Um, and so this mercantilist mindset of sort of a zero-sum game, where each nation is in competition with every other nation for capital, transition during the name of the book, I believe, is The Wealth of Nations, is sort of the one that initiated this. And in the Keynesian model, nations issued their own currency by fiat, or at least kind of now they do, but they issued their own currency with the goal of enhancing trade relationships in general, with the theory being that if you get the more specialization that you get in terms of industry and output, the wealthier everyone can be because the net cost of the production of goods goes down over time. And this works really, really well, but only while economies are growing at an exponentially increased rate all the time forever. And when economies stop growing, the Keynesian model breaks down because it basically runs on debt from the future. So you're borrowing money from the future to pay for production in the present, to increase production in the present and future so that the debt in the future is significantly less than what you are producing with it now. And so when economies stop growing at an exponential rate, the Keynesian model breaks down because at that point you're borrowing from the future to produce less now, to produce more now than you will be able to produce in the future, or to produce the same amount now that you'll be able to produce in the future, and it creates a debt spiral. And the problem that we're facing right now is threefold. One is that the economy is starting to hit hard energy limits for the amount of energy we can manipulate as a civilization. And you're seeing this in Germany and Russia with the Russian gasoline trade. France is doing okay, but the problem is increasing the size of your economy always requires increasing the size of your energy input. And the second issue that we're running into is that raw resources, they're still in the ground and we can keep pulling them out of the ground, but the speed at which we can pull them out of the ground is beginning to hit a limit. So we can keep pulling minerals and ore and metal and oil out of the ground, but we can't keep pulling it out of the ground faster every year. And so because of that, the amount of resource and energy input into the economy is becoming limited, which breaks down the Keynesian model. And then the third problem that we're running into is demographic, where if the population stabilizes or starts to drop, and it's dropping at an alarming rate right now, it's just, it hasn't really hit us yet. Anybody who's paying attention can see that we're driving towards a brick wall at 80 miles per hour. And you can slam your foot down on the brakes all day, but you're still going to hit it. So with the population declining so rapidly, the physical scale of the economy in terms of GDP has to decline with population. And so the Keynesian model, which requires infinite growth forever at an ever accelerating rate to remain stable, is falling apart. So I would argue that capitalism, in its basic concept of trade and the ownership and commodification of things, works, but it doesn't work under the Keynesian model that we've been running it under for the last 200 years or so.
I mean, the problem is when you start having these like basic structures of capitalism where you go, okay, well, we own this land and we own this resource and we own this. You're divorcing it from like a human model where it's like, you're not the only person who exists and you're not going to be the only person who exists. You have the problem of like out west in like underneath like the Okaleechee water aquifer and things of this nature, where you have like these farmers who, they're under like an intense amount of stress as far as like loans and interest and all these type of things, and having to buy new technology constantly in order to keep up and like produce more goods and put more food, more corn, more soy, more wheat, right? They're just drawing all this water off, and they're getting to the point where like they're drawing the water for aquifer so far down that it's collapsing and it's not able to like replenish. And so what happens when your next generation comes through and your next generation wants to be able to farm and they don't actually have that water resource anymore? This is the issue with the capitalist structure of, the whole thing of you owning it, like short term instead of thinking about things long term. And that's a problem in the pricing model of like capitalism that doesn't really exist.
So my argument is that that's a problem that is a much more a fundamental problem in the Keynesian model of capitalism than it is in the mercantile model of capitalism. So here's what I mean. If you had, for example, a currency or a base layer money that went up in value over time, people would be incentivized to save and expend only on the things that they needed. Whereas what we have in a Keynesian model is inflation, where the value of money goes down over time, and so people are incentivized to spend as quickly as possible, which creates that short-term mindset that you're talking about. But if your base money that everyone uses goes up in value over time, then people will have a much longer time horizon, which is, say, a low time preference. Low time preference for the acquisition of goods, and people will think in terms of years or decades in terms regarding the output value they can create, rather than thinking in terms of quarterly reports. The quarterly report thing and the high time preference, short time horizon thing that we see in the modern capitalist markets are heavily built around the fact that currency inflates very quickly over time, and that maintaining the stability of the Keynesian model with inflation requires that large capital entities be in direct competition with each other in a zero-sum game. If one company doubles its value in a static economy, then another company has to have its value. And given that our economy is now static, effectively, what we're seeing is these huge companies compete with each other for valuation. And it doesn't look static like the stock market. GDP number go up, therefore good. But the fundamental flaw of the way most people and most even politicians and specialists look at it is GDP number go up over the last 20 years almost solely due to inflation. Like the value of money is cut in half, so now the valuation of these big companies is doubled.
Yeah, yeah. I have a buddy of mine, TK Mao. He's a physicist, right? That's like what he went to college for, and so he's really good with numbers. And he basically went through and he broke down the actual economic growth of the country over the past, I want to say like, what was it, like past 15 years, something like that. And he said they've had less growth than they did during the Great Depression, right? And I mean, and that's just due to currency devaluation when it really comes down to it. But there's always been a currency devaluation. And if there's not, you have the issue of investment, right? The biggest issue that we've had is oil, which is actually something like I wrote down a whole bunch of notes, right? I mean, I wanted to discuss with you, right? Was oil logistical limits, right? We're having a problem with oil just as an in general thing because the reason why you have the population that we have right now of 8 billion people, we went from like 1.5 to 8 billion in 100 years, is because of oil. Right, the long-term logistical chains like the refrigeration, the ability to wrap things in plastics, your fertilizer, like all the things that you have is all because of oil. You know, the oil-powered dump trucks, the oil-powered combines, the oil-powered harvesters, the oil-powered, machinery, the electricity, all the stuff that comes from like oil. And with us not having the ability to have oil be a easy thing to access anymore, right, and having oil be something that is much more difficult for
the energy return on investment.
Yeah.
Instead of investing like 1 barrel of oil worth of energy to receive 50 barrels of oil worth of energy, the way it used to be back in the late 1800s when sort of all this industrialism got started, it's now like 1 to 3. So for every barrel of oil of energy invested, we get 3 barrels of oil worth of energy out in a useful fashion. It's really getting very narrow. The energy return on investment. There's a book called what is it? Let me look it up. So there's a book about that looks at this does a very good job of looking at this. I think it's called Breaking Together. It's written by like a Champagne, he's not really a leftist, but like a Champagne boomer, who's talking about how the world's going to change as energy gets more expensive, and all these people at Davos that are his friends, they're all worried about it, and he thinks that things could really get bad where he lives in the United Kingdom. And I'm like, well, that's all true, and you're not wrong, because he's right about all of the scientific topics and the numbers discussions. But his version of the end of the world is I can no longer fly to Tahiti to have fucking mimosas with my retard friends from Davos, because this dude's like a Champagne neocon pseudo boomer. It's just really frustrating to read sometimes, where it's like, oh, and people are going to have to start food rationing, and we're like, poor people are already middle class people are doing that, dude. So it's a bit of a frustrating read, but he's very good at understanding the first principles of where all of these issues are coming from, and the fake solutions that are being presented, because you can't just fix energy return on investment. Like there's no fix for that.
Yeah, like right now the fracking's never made any money, right? Like fracking is what they do is they stand here and it's literally like Uber, where they just keep trying to find new investors to come in, and the government knows it needs energy, so the government just keeps using people like BlackRock to invest in, like these fracking companies. Because it's not profitable. Like all of the returns of your fracking wells come in the first 12 months. After that, it drops off to 5%. Right.
Yes, but 5% return is actually enough for most industries.
No,
The
no, no. I'm
problem
not. I'm
with
not talking about
that
like
is
5% on like the return on investment. I'm talking about like 5% of the initial like amount of oil that came out.
yes. But again, it's so
Yo,
to get
listen,
into
yo,
detail on
it's
this, this
tiny,
is
right? It drops to nothing, right? And then it just
yes.
keeps trickling down to almost nothing. And like, so we ran out of like, again, like your whole idea of like, we ran out of like the easily, accessible oil a long time ago is 100% correct. That happened in the 1970s, which is one of the reasons we got that major like twist in how we did business and how, like we treated each other. And this is part of that whole, like hard money thing. The divorce from the Bretton Woods $45 per ounce gold thing that happened after France like floated a warship in the New York harbor and demanded its cash back, which is that's hilarious, I personally think. Right. But after that happened and we divorced ourselves from the hard currency backing, right? At least to other countries, because that was never true for like regular citizens. Um, that was a response, right, to the fact that we had ran out of petroleum, we ran out of like easily accessible oil, and we had constant inflation every year of like human like of like actual like cost of goods and labor cost, right? And it was getting to the point where like we could no longer compete in the world stage as being like the world's manufacturer, right?
I mean, we aren't the world's manufacturer
You know, we're
at
not
all.
anymore, right? But like we were.
Yeah, but we stopped being the world's manufacturer in the 1980s.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's happened in like the '60s, right? Like the
Mhm.
'60s was like a major turning point where, we had like massive union strikes and all this type of stuff where, you had humans, and this is one of the reasons we're having a problem right now, is where you used to have like there was a structure where you had the unions were able to pull capital down from the upper class, right? And from where, all the currency got created from banking and the Federal Reserve and all that type of nonsense into the hands of the regular people, right? And whether or not everybody else was union, it didn't matter. They drove up wages for everybody. And so therefore, capital maintained more of a balance and we maintained a lifestyle. But the problem is like globally, when you have other manufacturers coming online, Japan, China, France, Germany, whatever the case is, they don't have the standard of living that we have. So therefore, like we don't have the we're not able to compete. And then you
Okay,
add in the
so
fact of like oil was literally like ubiquitous with us being able to like travel long distances, be able to go to work. Everybody have a car, like highway transportation, not doing public transport. So you didn't have like all these overhead pieces that everybody else had. It turns into like where we are today. We're just kind of like fucked. You know what I mean?
well, so this gets a little complex. Effectively, any country that isn't quote unquote like developed in first world by the end of honestly nowish, any country that doesn't manage to make it to first world status here in the beginning of the 21st century is never going to make it to first world status. And it's because the resources to do so are going to be too expensive. What I find likely is that nations with big militaries, especially the United States and China, the Russians are also doing this, but they're kind of jumping the gun and they won't have the population to back it up. Nations with big militaries are very likely to work very hard to maintain their quality of life, even as energy and return on investment and resource scarcity becomes a problem. Um, there's another book that I would reference that's very good called The Ecotechnic Future, which looks at the stages of human civilization, very similar to the way that you get uh, biological succession, environmental succession. So you have different types of environments that produce new environments over time until eventually you get what's referred to as a climax ecology, which is where that ecology then remains stable for hundreds or thousands of years in a given area once you go through all the successions. Um, and right now we're going through a succession in um, sociology along with industrial production. So my thought process is that the United States, China, and a couple of other big players are going to try and maintain their growth economies because we are trying to maintain our growth economies through inflation and a bunch of other nonsense. But they will eventually realize that the only way to maintain their growth economies is to effectively just bully smaller countries and take their resources. So if specific metals become too rare, we will go to countries that are trying to develop and take all of the minerals and produced materials that they have. In the United States, we'll do it in a mercantile way because that's how we roll. We'll say, "Oh no, no, we're just paying through the nose for vanadium," and it looks like Brazil has a lot of vanadium. And meanwhile, in Brazil, you've got gangs going around stripping electronics and then selling them to dealers who sell them to American mineral processors to get the vanadium out. So I find it likely that we will manage to maintain growth economies in the developed world for probably another couple generations by stagnating and drawing resources out of the developing world that has not, they don't have the military or the trade infrastructure to stop us from doing it. That's what China's already doing in Africa. And the United States is very likely to follow once we get through this social dark age, this social dead zone, when the far left, everybody deserves to live here and be respected ideology is replaced with a much more militant America First type of ideology.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, right? I'd like your takes on a couple of your substacks that you had about like geography, you know what I mean, being based on stuff or using geography as a basis for like understanding how things probably will end up shaking out. In particular, I think that we underutilize our waterways in the United States,
We do.
right? Like we use them for irrigation and we use them, you know what I mean, like to bring water to cities or whatever the case is, but we don't use them as much for transport as I think we should, right?
Well,
And
it really depends on which waterways. Like the entire breadbasket uses the Mississippi River to ship to international markets.
yeah, but I mean, all right, so the amount of use that we still do with like the Erie Canal and the Great Lakes and the Mississippi for manufacturing is far lower as a percentage, right, of GDP for goods moved than it used to be, right? And we underutilize also our rail network as well. Like I don't think we use it as much as we do. Like I'm in logistics. I think that's something that needs to be like rethought about. I don't understand why it is that we continually have to use trucks for just-in-time delivery. It's one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. Any hard good should be moving by train. It's kind of ridiculous that we move it by truck. It doesn't make any sense. But that's something else that I wrote down in my notes about your stuff, right? Where the idea of, you know, I mean, keeping us and like these other large like geographical land masses as nation states that have one universal like normalized language, right? Without major regional dialects and without like having new languages develop is a process only done through like the education system and continuing to have conformity in how the language gets used. And I think that's something that is going to end up being divorced here soon as we end up not like AI takes over like more stuff. We end up becoming more productive. We need less workers. You're going to end up having more people doing homeschooling and doing more local agriculture, more local food production, which is going to cause more people to stay in their communities, which is going to end up causing a more bifurcation of, you know what I mean, like how humanity actually works and going back to more of a normal state of having regional areas that operate like properly. I think that's something, you know what I mean, that like is coming in a really soon way, just because it doesn't make any sense how we do it now, because like there's no reason why like a political entity should encompass Southern California and Maine. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, the United States is a really, really bizarre country. All the New World countries are really weird countries. Um, Canada, the US, Mexico. And it's because just about the entire founding stock of the New World came out of European hegemonic powers, with the United States in particular inheriting the small island mercantile culture of Britain, only then getting an entire continent to play with. So, in terms of personality, the United States is going to need to change a lot in order to start behaving as aggressively as it needs to maintain quality of life for its own people. And that's part of the big political fight that you're seeing right now is between the people who want to do it the old way, where sort of this culture of abundance, versus the people who are well aware of the sacrifices that are going to need to be made, and either we make them or we make other people make them. But we are entering a world where the energy return on investment isn't quite high enough to justify attempting to bring everybody up into first world living standards, because it's simply not going to happen.
I 100% agree. Right it's never going to end up being a thing where you're going to have all of these Southeast Asian nations and places like the subcontinent of India, where you have like 1.4 billion people, right, trying to climb into like the first world. That doesn't. There's not enough energy. There's not enough resources. There's not enough like minerals in order to allow them to be able to have the same lifestyle as somebody in, say, you know what I mean, like the suburbs of Chicago. That's never going to happen. And also I wanted to discuss with you, I think we're way further down the path than we thought we were, right, as far as demographics are concerned. And the UN is
demographics were completely cooked, bro.
Oh, listen. Have you seen the lady who does the AI adjustments of China's like actual population?
I am aware of that. So I follow the Chinese relatively closely for a number of reasons. But it does appear that their GDP numbers they've been lying about their GDP numbers for like 3 decades, because that's the way these top-down regimes are. Every like local magistrate will lie about the official numbers and give themselves like a 5 or 10% bump on average. And then the higher level magistrates will lie to the central government by another 5 or 10%. And then the central government will probably want to bump it by another 5 or 10%. So you end up with like an average of like 20% bullshit in their GDP numbers and population numbers, respectively. And I think that based on what that woman said, and there's a number of different people that have gone over this. She said that the real population of China might be as low as like 750 million people. I don't think it's that low, but I could easily see it actually floating somewhere around 1 billion to 1.1 billion people, meaning they're lying. They've effectively lied on their demographic charts about their population numbers by an amount equal to the entire population of the United States.
All right, so like, do you follow Peter Zehan by chance?
A little bit. He's a little bit of a doomer for me. Anyway, I he's smart, but I think that he takes ideas and runs with them too far.
Yeah, I mean, all right. I like the information he gives, right? Like the hard facts, not the, you know what I mean, like, oh, you know, Trump is, you know, captured by Russia stuff, because I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But his hard facts of like China admitted that they overcounted their population by 150 million, right? In the last, and not in this census, the last one in 2020, in 2010, right? And so all those people, and a lot of them were female. So all those people that like they said, you know what I mean, like existed in 2020, it might be under a billion, right? It might be 950 million.
I think it is under a billion. I think it's probably about 1 to 1.1 billion.
Yeah, I think it's like 950. Right? I think that's probably more likely.
Okay, I'll give you the 50 million plus minus 50 million. So let's say 950 to 1.1, and I'll call it good.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, if that's the case, right? Because that's the big problem is when you have large nations that are shrinking. Right. When you talk about like the largest nations on the planet, you're talking about like the United States, Brazil, India, China, and Russia. India still has, I think India is at like 1.9 or 2 kids per woman. Right. So they're still like right on the cusp. But Russia's well below. Brazil has an insanely low birth rate. It's like 1.4, 1.3. And China, we don't know. We don't actually know, because I've heard estimates as low as like 0.8 kids per woman at this point, right? And the United States is at 1.6, I think. You know what I mean? Like long term.
The United States is at 1.6. South Korea is, I think, at 0.6, and China's at like 0.8.
Yeah. So like when you start talking about these large countries that are shrinking, right? That's the big problem. Is like, it's not so much like a small, like for instance, Puerto Rico right now, their birth rate's like 0.5. Right, people aren't even paying attention to that because there's only like 4 million people in Puerto Rico, so like it doesn't really play into like the larger scale thing. When you start talking about like countries with a billion or 250 million, 300 million, 350 million, whatever the case is, or 160 million like you have in Russia, that's a much larger problem, right? That's the bigger issue that you start running into. Um, and I'm not 100% sure of like what we were talking about, like where we originally had a conversation about like the whole religion and God thing when it came down to it,
Mhm.
because I don't think Christianity can save the West.
Well, all right, so that's gonna get really interesting. I think we had this conversation briefly earlier, or we started to have it, and then I wanted to save it for this
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah, yeah.
Um, the Christianity in its classical form, I do not think will save the West, but I do think that Christianity is going to play a key role in the Americas. So first of all, I think that the United States is on the verge of going through ethnogenesis, along with the rest of the New World. I mean, like Brazil and Mexico basically already have. Um, but the United States is about to go through ethnogenesis too, and it's because Europe is going to be such a disaster politically and spiritually, that Americans are just not going to want to be associated with Europe, combined with the fact that the left sort of has carte blanche on declaring who counts as white and who doesn't. And at this point, they think everybody who votes conservative counts as white. So the white, quote unquote, Americans are going to consist of like Far Eastern Orientals, Filipinos, Japanese, Castizos up from Mexico that are just white looking. Of course, the Anglo-Saxon population is all going to get smudged together into a single semi-cohesive cultural unit simply because the left hates everybody who isn't them. And there's a whole lot of groups of people that are just not them at this point. Um, so the United States is going to undergo some really weird social transitions here very soon, and it's going to predominantly localize. So you're going to have like the white quote unquote population of Georgia or whatever, and it's going just for whatever reason the white black divide is not going to go away, but the white population of Georgia will consist of like people who speak Spanish and fucking rednecks out in the woods, and the Japanese guy who came over to work at one of their filming studios in Atlanta. Is going to be a really, really bizarre ethnogenesis, cultural ethnogenesis, followed by an actual genetic sort of ethnogenesis a generation or two after that. But the reason I bring that up is because one of the key components that we're not looking at when it comes to massive demographic decline is the way that you're going to get localizations to cultures that specifically produce kids. And in the old world, in Europe and whatnot, they had a tendency to eject all of their weird religious sects and cults um, to the New World. And so you had like the Quakers in the New World, and you had the Amish in the New World, and you have the Mennonites in the New World, and you have the Mormons in the New World. They started here, but you get all these really sort of bizarre religious groups in the New World, and almost all of them are founded on a Christian, an underlying Christian principle. Um, and if current trends continue in terms of demographic collapse, I mean, Pennsylvania was flipped by the Amish vote. The Amish were, in 1950, they were a couple 10,000 people over there, and now they're 400, almost a half million people living in Pennsylvania are Amish because they have 7 kids each and nobody else has kids at all. In Bolivia, the Mennonites represent 2% of all live births in the country in the last in this last year. So Bolivia in one generation, 30 years, is going to be 2% Mennonite, and Mennonites also have 5 kids each. So in another generation, they're going to be 30 or 40% Mennonite. And in the United States, in a broader sense, what you're going to see is a coalition of Mormons, some Hispanic Catholics, Amish, and Mennonites forming like a 30 or 40% of the voting bloc by the year 2100, or maybe a little later, 2125, a century from now. So in that sense, I think you're going to see a resurgence of a relatively militant Christian culture, and that it's going to exist as an offshoot of these hyper-traditional and somewhat letitous factions. Again, you see Mennonites, you see Amish, you see Mormons aren't that letitous, but in comparison to like New World use technology for everything and have an AI whisper in your ear, they're going to be letitous in comparison to what we are now. And so I think Christianity is going to quote unquote save the West insofar as the Americas, because you're going to get these bizarre Christian sects and cults becoming not just mainstream, but becoming a significant part of a plurality of the voting bloc and a significant holder of cultural prestige, that will act in their own interests against the interests of what we consider now to be the cultural fracture of the political left. The left is cooked. There's no scenario in which they get to quote unquote win and have their utopia. They're all cooked. The question is how long it takes and how violent do they get before they give up.
Yeah. All right. So, like, first off, I want to say respect for like being somebody who recognizes the Amish, because you are one of two people I've ever heard talk about the Amish, and the other person's me. Right. Like, so when we talk about birth rates, you know what I mean? Like when you ever hear about anybody talk about birth rates, no one talks about the Amish ever. Right. Cause I live in Pennsylvania. So like, I know, right. You know, like I'm around them all the time. Like I know exactly what's going on with the Amish. But all right. I don't think that Christianity, right, as a whole, right, is going to save the West. And the reason I say that is because, like, I don't think that these small militant people, now I understand the Mormons, right, because, like, but the Mormons are like the CIA status quo leftist type of human beings, right? Like it's the Mitt Romneys, it's the lady who just won Virginia, I forget her name, right? These are the Mormon type of people who end up, you know what I mean, like being part of like the deep state structure that end up like continuing like the status quo, which you would call leftist programs today. So I don't think that like they're really going to be a large help. I think the Amish are great. Like I love the Amish. The Mennonites are awesome. But ultimately we're going to need much more localistic ideologies, right? Tied to much more geographical basis, right? And we're going to need like people who are willing to be aggressive. And the Amish and the Mennonites, well, the Amish are pacifists. The Mennonites aren't. The Mennonites are the military. They're the militant wing of like the Amish fucking church. That's why like everywhere you see Amish, there's Mennonites all surrounding them, and they're armed to the teeth. Yeah, but I don't think they're going to be the savior of the West. Like, we're going to need people who are willing to be aggressive, willing to defend their people, willing to defend their culture, willing to defend their homeland, their family, all these type of things. And I don't see them as being that. Like, I was having a conversation like earlier about Dr. Fauci, right? They put out a documentary about him, whatever, right? And I was like, yo, they're like, oh, I want to see what they're going to say. And I was like, they're going to kiss his ass and try to like do the whole, you know, justifying his bullshit thing. Because if he ended up, him and his, you know what I mean, cohort ended up being found out that they caused the deaths of at minimum 7 million human beings, right? By going around the laws that were put into place to stop like the research or whatever the case is, he'd have to be publicly executed. And I don't think the Christians had the stomach for that.
All right. The current ones don't. I'll give you that. But so what's going to happen, I suspect, is the Amish, Mormons, and Mennonites are going to form a backbone. There's an underlying like cultural backbone and become a plurality of the vote, occupying maybe 10% of the vote in 100 years and like 50% of the vote in 200 years. But it's not just that they exist, it's that a significant percentage of their kids leave their direct communities and then proceed to influence the larger culture. So I suspect that what you're going to see is you're also going to see formerly relatively ambivalent Christian sects, the Eastern Orthodox, some of the Protestant sects like Baptists and Lutherans, and the Catholics, some of the Catholics. You're going to see those sects start unifying around a more militant attitude because the young right is just very militant, and they are entering these spaces just like they're entering the Republican Party. And they're like, 30% of the Republican Party are these groypers, far-right extremists. And we're like, the number's probably 50%, but you only caught 30%. And so you're going to see this growth of a relatively militant form of Christianity that will be on top of, for lack of better phrasing, a backbone of the Amish population, the Mormon population, the Mennonite population. I mean, Mormons are willing to go to war. Mormons have their own like militant arm. They have their own church militant. And you're probably going to see security companies and church groups pop up that are getting more and more militant over time here soon. Also, it's going to start off, well, it depends on where you are, but it's going to start off relatively light, simply to provide security to churches because of all of these damn shootings. So I do think that the Amish themselves don't necessarily have the stomach for the type of crusade that may take place. But I don't think that they're going to be voting against it either. I think what will happen is they will form a cultural bulwark against aggressively anti-Christian cultural and theological ideals, and then the more militant wings of that ethos are going to have free reign to get aggressive with the enemies of American civilization. And I am going to qualify that again because I don't think it'll save Europe. I think Europe is quite cooked at this point. I think the best case scenario for Europe is the Catholic Church reforms extremely hard in the next 20 years and saves some of Europe, probably the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, Spain, because they've already dealt with this crap. Germany's cooked. Italy is probably going to be okay. And then the Eastern Bloc nations are probably going to be okay. And they're all going to form around this sort of Mediterranean Holy Roman Empire style of orthodoxy and Catholicism and whatnot, and they'll have their petty squabbles and whatnot. Have you ever read the book or heard of the book Fitzpatrick's War?
I've heard of it.
Fitzpatrick's War is a fascinating book that seems to have a more accurate picture of the world. The world. It was written like in the 60s too, right? Of future history than most people can be given credit for. Fitzpatrick's War takes place. It's a sort of science fiction future history book that takes place in a few hundred years after the United States breaks up into two groups, what we would effectively describe as the modern progressive movement and everyone else. It's a rural-urban divide. The rural people decide to use atomic weapons when the urban people use atomic weapons when the rural people try to break away. In response, the rural people finally flip the table and just go and massacre fucking everybody. And then oil starts running out, and what you get is after a few hundred years, the United States resolidifies as a single nation with a very strong imperialist mindset that uses predominantly steam power and older industrial tools in order to begin a global conquest. And I could easily see something akin to that happening if you end up with the Amish and the Mennonites and the Mormons becoming a plurality of the vote. Recentering the United States after catastrophic population collapse and recentering in like 100 years and stabilizing the population of the US at like 150 million people. And then I could see somebody calling for a crusade to retake Northern Europe. But I'd say that's like the best case scenario. I do think that the resource shortages we're running into now and the catastrophic demographic decline is the primary, that's going to be the primary danger of our age, is navigating that correctly. And it's going to be incredibly difficult, especially with boomers still in office who are in their 80s or 90s refusing to step down from power.
Yeah, I mean, Pelosi just stepped down. I think
Yeah,
like
she said she wouldn't run again.
2 days. Yeah, she said she's not going to run anymore. There's a couple more. Mitch McConnell's done like so. There's a lot of them are actually starting to move out, but I think they're actually like silent gen people. I don't even think they're boomers, right? Which is the
Yeah.
ridiculous thing. But yeah. So okay. Historically, the Amish and the Quakers, they were a problem for Pennsylvania back in like the 1700s, where you had like these settlers in the mountains, right, out towards like I guess would be like Perry County, whatever the case is. We're getting raided by the Iroquois on a regular basis, and the Amish and the Quakers refused to like help because they were pacifists. And they're like, oh, we don't fight wars, whatever the case is. We're not going to help you. And so like the settlers came in and literally took over the government, right, in order to get funds and ammo in order to go fight against the fucking Indians. And then you had the Susquehannock tribes who asked for shelter from the Iroquois. They were like, hey, listen, we want to be able to stand here and, still survive. And these Iroquois are hunting us. And literally the Iroquois just marched in and massacred them right in front of the fucking Quakers and the Amish. I don't think that like the Amish have ever or will ever have the stones to be able to like, they're not they're not like the Afghanis or the steppe people or the corded ware or the Yamanis, right? Where or Yamayan, right? There we go. Who sat here and brought in like this ideology of like, yeah, you defend travelers, right? Because like that could be your gods or whatever the case is. They don't have that, right? And I don't think Christianity offers that. Just as an in general thing, right? I don't think it's there. And I get the fact that like the left is cooked, right? Because all of the left's ideologies of like, totally gay, space, like automated gay space communism is over, right? All these ideologies of saying like, hey, listen, we're going to go to Mars and live in moon glues that's done, right? That's over with. That's never going to be a thing. The fact that like they want to go and mine asteroids because like they're like, hey, listen, we want to continue this system and keep expanding, right? Is absolutely ridiculous.
Anybody who wants to mine an asteroid has no understanding of how mineral separation works.
Yeah, I fucking agree. They're just
like anybody with a background in mineral processing is like, no, we're not mining asteroids. There is one way to mine an asteroid. I figured out how. I figured out how to mine an asteroid. It's just no one will want to do it. Do you know how?
How you do it?
I've told you people this before. All right, so what you do is you find a asteroid rich in the minerals that you want, in the elements that you want, gold, rare earths, whatever. You bring it into low Earth orbit. Over the course of about 40 years, you use like a little ion thruster to move it around and use orbital assist to move it into low Earth orbit. Stick a huge heat shield on it, and then you drop it on Nevada, and then you mine the crater. That's how you do it.
Yeah, the ROI on this sounds ridiculous. That's kind of where I get to. Like all of these things are insane. It doesn't make any sense. So, but yeah, the left, because of the fact that the left is basically these merchant class individuals who want to be able to be the bureaucracy to continue to be able to live wherever they want in the same standard of living, And this is kind of my problem as well with like the ortho.
I argue that they're not merchant class; they're bureaucratic class. The merchant class doesn't really exist at this point. It's been replaced by a separate estate, the bureaucracy class. And all they do is shuffle numbers around.
I would argue they are the merchant class, right? I would argue they are continuing like the merchant ideology. Liberalism is the merchant's religion, right? In the end of the day. And this is my problem with like the ortho bros and the new Catholic groypers and all this stuff. Really, in reality, what they want is they want to go back to being able to live, at a standard of living in which their parents or, their grandparents or whoever lived at. Right. They actually don't want to like, they don't want to live in like a theocracy. That's not what they want.
I mean, that's true, but I don't think the U.S. would ever be a theocracy, not in effective function. But the merchant class, I would argue, is the class of people who do production and trade goods. And I would argue that the bureaucratic class is different in that if a merchant purchases or produces goods that no one will buy, they lose their income. But the bureaucracy class is insulated from that because they don't actually produce anything. What they do is act as intermediaries for remaining merchants. And most of the merchants themselves are subsumed into institutions run by the bureaucracy class. And so that's why everything's getting enshittified, is because the bureaucracy class experiences no negative effects, no reality dictating true, false, or profitable, unprofitable to the bureaucratic class. They're the optimal job for a bureaucrat. So if you get a job in a bureaucracy, and I've had jobs in bureaucracy, the best job in a bureaucracy is if you get a position and then you tell your boss, hey, this is too much for me. What we need to do is split my job into two smaller jobs and then have a bureaucrat do each of those jobs and I'll manage them. And if you do that, then you get to be a manager. And each one of those two new bureaucrats you hire, they're incentivized to do the same thing, to convince you that their job is too complicated and that you need to hire two more bureaucrats so they can split their job in half and have each of the little baby bureaucrats do one half of their job. So eventually what you end up with is one person who signs a letter, one person who stamps the letter, one person who folds it into the envelope, and one person who puts it in the mailbox. And so the bureaucracy itself becomes a cancer on human civilization. Bureaucracy actually effectively killed Chinese civilization several hundred years before the colonial expansion of Europe. And it's because the Chinese almost had the Industrial Revolution like 3 times in a row. They developed what is it, like the Bessel converter or a variation of the Bessel converter for steel making, and the bureaucracy regulated it out of existence because it was a threat to the bureaucracy. The only reason the internet's been so effective is because bureaucrats have been too old and incompetent to figure out how to regulate it. And as a result, I would argue that the bureaucratic class and the actual mercantile class, the ones that produce goods and trade goods, are at extreme odds with each other and do not get along at all. So even like a Wall Street trader who is trading on the margin is getting immediate feedback as to whether or not he's productive or successful or failing. But the fella in New York who regulates the electricity and bandwidth of his internet gets no feedback on whether or not these regulations are doing their job or not. And so what you have is a bureaucrat who hampers the mercantile class in being productive. Now, that's not to say the mercantile class should be entirely unregulated. I just think bureaucracies are an ineffective way to regulate them.
I think they're both like one side of each coin, right? You have like this merchant class who are the internationalists, like want to be able to live everywhere the same way that they live where they are.
Okay, I don't like those guys, but
yeah, right. And then you had the manager class who, basically rides along with them and sets the rules so that they can live everywhere they want to be able to live and conduct business in the same way that they conduct business at home. Right. This is why it's like everywhere you go in America, it looks the identical same way. Right. There's a Jack in the Box or whatever. There's like a Raising Cane's, there's a Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, Wendy's, Target, Whole Foods, all these type of things. These are all the same people, right? They want to be able to live everywhere, and they want to like be able to standardize things so that they can, be able to do everything everywhere. Right. This is the whole oligarchy of title, right? Where it's like your college degree is your title, right? So you're able to join the management / bureaucratic / mercantile class.
That's the purpose of a college degree, is to join. Well, no, I'd argue the purpose of the college degree is to join the managerial class, because the managers are not selected for based on competence, so they need an alternative method. And they used the university degree as a stand-in in order to create a bar of entry for entering numbers in spreadsheets like idiots. Anybody can do the job of your average bureaucrat. Like, as somebody with an IQ of 85 can do the job of your average bureaucrat. But they use college admission and college graduation as a bar of entry in order to prevent normal people from getting into those positions. Which
I would say it serves a dual purpose. One is, it allows you to have like that entry thing, but the reason why it has that entry thing is because like it inculcates you into that culture, right? You learn how to talk,
It
you
also
learn
does
how to
that,
write
yes.
emails, you know what I'm saying? You learn how to like communicate, you learn what the rules are, all this type of stuff. That's the purpose of that, right? Because if you can make it through 18 years, no, not 18 years, what is it? It's 13 plus 4, so yeah, 17 years of like public education, right? Plus whatever pre-K nonsense you can call it, 18, whatever, right? If you can make it through 18 years of standing here, you know, what I mean, being able to like deal with, you know, what I mean, like being inside of that institution, you're peaceful enough to join their fucking class, right? If you vile out and become violent and just start, you know, what I mean, smacking people around, just like going fuck this shit, they're not going to let you into their class, right?
I mean, that's true.
That's a thing.
But what it's done is accidentally selected for people that are Machiavellian. And so what we end up with is a bureaucratic class that is increasingly Machiavellian, and willing to screw others for their own benefit, and willing to lie about what they believe for their own benefit. Um, and as a result, you get the insanity that is the modern university. I actually have a theory on what's going on with leftism and human civilization. Um, all right, so I'll break it down for you real quick because
Okay.
I find it fascinating and I want to hear your opinion on it. I'm bouncing it off people. I'm writing an article on it right now because I don't think anyone's realized this before. Are you familiar with AI model collapse?
Basically where the AI is studying other AI and it's like becoming a copy of a copy and it's like fucking shit up at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're familiar with the Mouse Utopia experiments?
John C. Calhoun, baby. Of course.
Yep. So here's my premise. Leftism and urban bug people, AI model collapse, and Mouse Utopia are all caused by the same principle, which is to say that, and I'll use Mouse Utopia as the example, the little bitty baby mice don't have access to the real world. They only have information provided to them by the older mice, which is to say other entities of their own class. And so because they have very limited real world information to build their psychological model off of, their psychological model gets the same flaws as AI models that are training on AI generated data, which is to say it forgets long tail distributions of the data in sort of like Gaussian distribution, a bell curve. It'll forget long tail distributions. It'll make up nonsense long tail distribution data, and it'll start hallucinating and getting delusional, just like AI models do when trained exclusively on AI generated data, or even mostly on AI generated data. The proposal is that urban bug people also train on only human generated data. The walking up and down this has happened, this is something I've seen, where a kid who's like 3 or 4 years old and has only ever lived walked on sidewalks and flat parks has an incredibly difficult time walking up and down a hill for the first time because they've never had to. Their model of the way the floor works simply does not include bumps or slopes. And what you're seeing is that people, when they live in cities, live in an environment that's 100% generated by other people. And so they become completely disconnected from the way the world actually works. They get delusional. They start hallucinating nonsense, and believing completely, in really believing, things that are completely false about the way the world works because they no longer have access to real information. They only have information created by other entities of their own class. So AI runs into this problem, mice run into this problem, humans run into this problem. And as a result, you're getting these catastrophic population declines in urban areas, in cities, because the psychological model that people build, the neural network, the neural network that people are developing in these places is so divorced from reality because the data they're receiving is corrupted data effectively. And you get this as a generational problem. First generation AI, second generation AI, third generation AI. Mice get it through like 3 or 4 generations, and it looks like humans do it through 3 or 4 generations too. This is fascinating to me.
All right. So, okay. I like Zihan's take on this. Because, all right, you mentioned Machiavelli earlier. Like, listen, I'm a student, right? At the end of the day, I've read everything he's ever written, like multiple times. Actually, I have a breakdown on my YouTube channel. Anybody wants to go
I
watch
like
it.
Machiavelli too. I've read him.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think Art of War from Machiavelli might be the finest piece of literature written in the past 500 years. That's my personal opinion. It's only because I really like it. It's my favorite book. But the pragmatic idea, right, or like the Christian idea of us being like individuals who with individual choices and all this type of fucking retarded nonsense, which comes from like liberalism and the Enlightenment and just this Western ideology. I don't think it actually is real. I think it's something that like we just apply to ourselves in the same way we apply consciousness just to ourselves, where we go, oh, humans are the only ones with imagination. I'm like, why is it that my cat brings me its bowl? Why does my dog bring me its toy to throw? Right? It's because like it can picture things like later on. It has imagination, right? Like this is nonsense. There's a transaction that happens with everything and everyone in the entire world. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's, you know what I mean, like a dog who interacts with, you know what I mean, like a patch of grass, you know what I mean, because like it helps its stomach. It doesn't matter whether it's, you know what I mean, a person interacting with another person because that person has like a fruit or like a piece of meat that it wants, right? All these things are interactions, right? And they're all transactions in our life, right? We have these things that happen, and you interact with things and you have transactions with things because like they're positive and negative to you. Children are the same way. And we've noticed this, you know what I mean, this is like a super black pill for most people. Women don't really like babies, right? If you give a woman a choice of being able to support themselves or have to like have a baby to a dude, right? Or have a baby to a man and have him support them, right? They're going to choose to support themselves and not have that baby, right?
I actually disagree with you.
Okay, go ahead. Let's explain it to me, my brother.
So here's my disagreement. It's not that they don't want babies, it's that they don't want to make the choice to have one. Many women want children, but they say, oh, well, maybe someday, maybe like I want to have kids, but maybe someday. And this is a common human behavior. This isn't exclusive to women. Women just exemplify it in this particularly catastrophic way, a lot more strongly. Which is to say that having a kid is like a life-changing event. And many people, like the majority of people, I would actually argue, they tend to find a place of existing that is comfortable, and they may want to change it, but they do not want to take the responsibility for changing it themselves. So a woman who's working a job and single or maybe has a boyfriend, she wants to have a baby, but she does not want to be the one responsible for choosing to have a baby. And a lot of men are like this too. They want to have kids, but they don't want to choose to have a kid, because if they make the choice, they bear full responsibility for the consequences of it. And because it's an unknown sort of gamble and a dramatic life-changing event you can't go back from, it's very difficult for people to make that choice with intent. And so that is why, I mean, in many ways, that's why marriage and relationships sort of existed the way they have for such a long time. Because until birth control was developed, whether or not you had a kid wasn't really a conscious choice that a person would make. It is just a thing that would happen after you got married or after you were sleeping around. Kids would happen. So I think that it isn't that women don't like babies or don't want to have babies. I'm sure some don't, but I think the majority of them want kids. But they do not want, in typical female fashion, they don't want the responsibility of making the choice themselves. Like when you ask her where she wants to eat when you're going on a date, and she says, I don't know. She knows where she wants to go. She just doesn't want to be the one who chose the place to go. And so they want kids. Let
me throw this in real quick, right? Let me throw this in real quick. All right. So, they have this polling data, right? Which me and you, like, I feel like we should both really take all data with a grain of salt at this point, because,
yeah, of course,
women say they want to have kids.
Yeah.
How do I put this? The idea that I think it's a learned meme that they say they want to have kids, right? I think the reality is much different. I
Right.
don't think they actually want to have. I think it's something they say as like a social thing, right? Where it's like, yeah, I want to have kids, but the reality is when you give them the because this isn't new, right? This happened in Babylon. This happened in Rome. Happened in Sparta. Happened, I mean,
All right,
in
all right. I would counter
what
with female gooner trash.
female what?
Female gooner trash, the pornography that they read all the time.
I mean, yeah, the female
Because
gooner.
in
No, no,
all
no.
of that,
Yeah, I get you. Like the whole like rape fantasy, all that type of shit, like
well,
all
no,
the
no, no. What I
nonsense, right?
mean is, what I mean is fundamentally, even the ones where they do have kids, like Handmaid's Tale, they cede agency to another entity that makes the choice for them on whether or not they're having kids.
Mm, I'll be honest with you. Let me keep this 100. Okay,
Okay.
I have 8 kids, right?
Base.
And the women who, I mean, have bred with me asked me to do so.
Uh-huh.
It was never like, oh no, we're pregnant. It was never that. It was like, oh my God, I want to have your baby. And it's almost immediate too, right? It's like fucking 2, 3, 4 days in, like, I mean, hitting it off, right? I don't think that's true, right? I think literally they say they want to have kids, right? And they don't actually want to have kids. They like the idea of the Instagram post or the Facebook post of having a child and being able to put it up in its, I mean, Halloween costume, or, I mean, having it open presents, or, I mean, like splatter cake on its face. They like that idea, but they don't actually want to have the kid. Because if it was true that they wanted to have the kid, they'd just have it. Like there's every welfare system. I know women right now who get $80,000 worth of welfare from the government every year.
Get on that train.
Right. I don't think they actually want to have children. I think the transaction, right? And that's what it really is in the end of the day, is just a transaction. Is it's detrimental to women, right? And I mean, it's the sacrifice of the body, it's a sacrifice of the vagina. There's pain that goes with it, which, by the way, I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with women about pain, right? They like it, when it comes to like sex or whatever the case is, like, oh, smack me, all that type of nonsense. But they really like let them get injured, right? I mean, like in working or whatever the case is, they will whine like a child forever. That's why they like stand here and flip out every time they go in to have like, some minor surgery to have a mole removed or
All right.
whatever. It's a
All right.
giant
So
thing.
all right, we're going to get into a little bit of detail on this. I think that women are programmed to have kids in the most efficient means because that's the way evolutionary programming works. And men are programmed to produce kids in the most efficient means. For men, the optimal method is to just sleep with as many women as possible. And for women, the optimal method is to find a single dude with a lot of resources who will commit to you. Historically, the way that women would end up having kids is they would, in theory, have a guy committed to them before intentionally sleeping with him. And they were expected to be sexually available to their husband while he was expected to support her. And in a situation like that, where she is effectively very low agency, kids are going to happen. And if you look at like pre-marriage societies, what you get is men with a lot of resources sleep with a large number of women, have a lot of kids, and the other men murder each other trying to accrue resources. So they either get to that point or they die trying. The way in which modern women behave is based solely around equal rights, where it's expected that they can do whatever they want, including not being sexually available to their husband, and the wide availability of birth control. If birth control wasn't widely available, you would see significantly more kids now than we are currently having, but you would
True.
still see a declining population, I believe.
Yeah.
And the declining population is a byproduct of the psychological breakdown that we're going through rather than a specifically gendered thing. Because you've seen populations going through deprivation and going through various forms of breakdown all over the world that are still growing in terms of population. But you never see a population with full egalitarianism or a population that's become as urbanized as we have that's still growing. So I think that the problem is a combination of egalitarianism between the genders because men and women simply are not the same. Um, Basically, to get the rate up, you need to remove egalitarianism between the genders. Um, you need to fix the psychological breakdown that's happening that's preventing coupling, and you need to remove birth control, and the birth rate will
All right.
shoot right back up.
So let me throw this in too, right? So when you look at it, right, and you start really digging into the stuff, you have probably two, we have like what, two populations of white people on the entire planet who still have kids. There's the Hasidic Jews in Israel, right, and then you have the Amish, right, and that's it.
And Mormons, I think Mormons are still positive.
I don't know if Mormons are still positive, and it depends on where they are too. And this is the big thing, right? So Mormons inside of a city don't have kids. The Mormons outside of a city, like living in a rural area, will have some kids. But I think the big thing is non-mechanized farming,
Okay,
right?
the
And that's
Mormons do not look like they're positive, but they are above. Well, the birth rate of Utah is not that high.
yeah. So
It's
okay,
the 1.85.
all right.
I'm
I
not done yet, but Mennonites also have a lot of kids. It's another group.
Yeah. The Mennonites do a lot of non-mechanized farming, and they still do a lot of labor work, right? So a lot of I know Mennonites in the area. They do they'll have like a sawmill on their property, and they'll do
They
you know what I
have
mean
an average. They have an average of
an average of
eight kids per woman.
who the Mennonites.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's true, right? Like I know a lot of Mennonites. I don't think they have eight, but like it's a good possibility. So here's the thing: it's a
Well,
transactional thing.
specifically, the Winger Mennonites. Other groups are as low as like six.
Yeah, like the Mennonites, as an in general thing, they do a lot of labor work. Where like they'll do construction, they'll do you know what I mean farming, they'll do agriculture, they'll do um they'll do like again like doing I guess it'd be like woodwork. I guess it is. Yeah, these type of things. And so in doing so, they have a transaction with their children that allows them to be able to help them long term in their work and in their labor, right? So therefore, they have more kids. This is the thing. When you move into a city, you lose that transaction. Kids go from being
I
they
disagree.
huh?
I don't think it's a transactional thing. For most people, I'll give you like the sort of autistic. That's not an aggressive like insult or anything. Just the autistic transactional mindset is very common in the modern world, but I don't think it's accurate because treating your kids transactionally is something that treating everything transactionally is something that's only appeared very recently under our modern economic system. Historically, entire communities would be treated as one entity.
Hmm.
So you would have like a little farming village, and you still see that with like Mennonites and the Amish, where the whole community, the whole village, is treated, the colony is treated as a single entity, and then people operate within that entity in a very tribal kind of way. And historically, that's the way it's always been. The transactional nuclear family is an extremely recent phenomenon. Um,
Yeah, I
and
mean
so it's talking,
the nuclear family doesn't in particular in like the modern suburbs, right?
yeah,
The suburbs have low fertility rates, right? They used to
correct.
have higher ones, but honest, like I think that's more of like a lot of people coming off of farms. Like that was 50% in 1950 were lived on
Yeah,
farms, and
no,
then
I agree with that.
you know what I mean. And then like it dropped off a cliff after like
My proposal, though,
1960.
is that it isn't um, fundamentally it isn't the transactional nature of modernity that's causing the drop in birth rates. It's the delusions created by people entering an environment that's entirely man-made. Because when you're on a farm and you screw something up, you know it. You get immediate feedback from the world. You have to fix something. You have to have a very intimate relationship with the natural world in its true state, with entities outside your own class. But in a suburban environment, you're mostly constrained to information and entities um, that that are of your own class, that are created by other people, and in an urban environment, even more so. So my proposal is that, generally speaking, from a psychological standpoint, women generally want to have kids, but they don't want to be the ones responsible for making the decision to have kids. Again, very generalized. But then when you're looking at the delusionality of urban and suburban populations, they become extremely mentally unhealthy because they are trained, they are learning information and basing their models of reality on information that is heavily corrupted by what other people produce.
All right. Yeah. So again, man, listen, like this is I think this is one of them, Occam's razor things where it's like the easiest solution. The most basic solution is like probably the correct one because this is not new, right? Like women stopped having children in Rome, right? They stopped having children in Sparta. They stopped having children in Babylon. This is not the first time. Urbanization, right? Just due to the fact that like you moved off the farm. On the farm, your kids are farm equipment, right? They help you, right? They're
Right.
useful, right? They're not useful in this. They're a burden in the city. You can't do anything. They're a massive resource sink.
I will give you that. And I will also give you that demographic decline correlates to percent urbanization. When a nation gets up past 60 or 70% urbanized, it goes into demographic decline pretty consistently.
Yeah, and I mean, like you have places in China and Asia in particular where like the birth rate is like point 0.2, right, or
It's
point
point
0.1.
0.6 in South Korea. It's 0.6.
Well, no. That's it's like the cities themselves, right? Like
I mean,
Shanghai.
yeah, I think in some of the cities.
Yeah, it's unbelievably low because you don't have kids in a city. Like, there's no reason to have children in a city. It doesn't make any sense, right? And this whole like it's I'd love to say, I mean, like we have biological genetic things because we do, like, and when we do, because we all want to have sex, all the type of stuff, we have sex drive, whatever the case is. But also when you get in a city, like testosterone drops, so does estrogen. That's why you end up having like the whole transgender thing where people are cutting off their penises, females are cutting off their tits and sewing up their vaginas, all this type of crazy stuff that's going on, is because like, you tend to end up conforming to like your environment. And if you're in an office all day, having a penis and having a high sex drive isn't helpful.
Um, yeah, I'll give you that. And there's definitely some percentage of transactionality in it. Um, I think that the problem is more fundamental than that, because if it was just that, then you wouldn't see the social breakdown of like the mice of John Calhoun's experiments. The social breakdown appears to be independent of long-term planning.
I mean, again, so it's the
And it's
transactional
also,
nature,
it
and
also,
there might
it
be a
also,
biological thing that we don't, like a switch where we,
well, it's
you
also
know,
resource independent,
you know what I mean?
because the mice in that situation had unlimited food and water
Yeah.
and no predators. So the problem is not a lack of resources, and it's not that the children represent a strain on the family resources, because even in infinitely resource-rich environments, you still get the same results.
Oh, yeah. Like, yeah, but again, like, so what is the trade-off though? Right? Like, what is the purpose of having children when you have
Well,
unlimited resources and there's already like too many people around you? It's why like
well,
everybody right now.
hold on.
But
In the Calhoun experiments, the mouse population never reached overpopulation.
oh yeah, I know.
It reached a maximum of 1/3 density, based on the amount
Yeah.
of resources available.
Like it was built for 10,000 and I think it only got to like 2,500 or 3 grand or something like that.
I think it was built for 6,000 and it got to like
Okay,
2,500. But yeah.
yeah. But like, yeah, it was built for much more than like it actually had, right? But that was like population limit. There may be a switch, right, inside of us where we all end up like anxiety ridden because it's something that's happening right now. All of us know what it is, right? Like all of us have
So,
like this massive amount of anxiety all the time, and I don't know what the hell it is. It's something that's been affecting me more and more recently as they pumped in all these immigrants here.
so this is, I think that at the fundamental level, the more disconnected we are from real information, which is to say, information about the way the world works that comes from outside of our own class, effectively, that doesn't come from other people. And this includes like a paved sidewalk is something produced by another person. So walking on it gives you information produced by other people. This is the premise that I'm working on is that the societal and individual psychological problems we're dealing with come from an inability to interact with the real world.
Mm.
And so you get people that go out camping for like an entire summer and they come back much more healthy than they left in terms of
Yeah.
intellectual ability.
Well, you know about the Jewish man. Listen, in Israel they had this the kibbutz, right? Where like they had like these communes where like they'd have like communal farming, whatever the case is, and they'd send prisoners there, right? And like literally just like putting people onto the land like basically eliminates all of like the psychological problems that comes with living inside of a city.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
So I think
I agree with you. Right. Like these are things that happens, but like I also like this transactional thing. It's 100% a thing where, on a farm, like you still have like it's an individualistic transaction, right? Where you go, okay, that mom doesn't want to have kids in a suburb or in a city because of the fact that like it hurts, right? It's a burden to her on her body, on her psychology, and a long-term commitment. It's the same reason why people don't get dogs in the city as much as they do like elsewhere.
I mean, yeah, because they don't have the space, but I think that there's something more fundamental going on.
It's not the space. It's not the space. It's also the long-term commitment.
Well, the thing is, mice don't have a consideration of long-term commitment.
I mean, they might.
So I presume, I think it's the same mechanism that affects people that does Mouse Utopia. I mean, that's the standing premise is anything that does this to us and does this to them has to be something that we're both experiencing. A lack of space is one option. A lack of one of the theories that I've heard posited is a lack of cultural space, basically an inability to move in terms of status, which is one reason you see millennials effectively in a perpetual childhood, is because they've just never been allowed to grow up because nobody's getting out of the way above them. So a lack of ability to control the space you're in, a lack of cultural space to move into, a fundamental miswiring of the psychology. Those are all options, but I don't think that the long-term resource drain of children is a sufficient reason to do it. You have people that are starving to death that are still having kids, and they know that they won't be able to feed them. Like that happens. That's happened throughout human history. But they start getting urbanized and they start living in comfortable homes and they stop having kids.
There's this idea of passing down like, all right, in my idea of like communitarianism, which is like my political ideology, right? Where it's like I think that communities should have rights. Part of it is the fact that like you own your culture. It's a piece of like private property for your community and your people. And it's something you get to pass down to like your children, right? And it's a big thing, right? As a whole, you're creating more of your own. The mice as a thing, right? In Mouse Utopia, mice are still cooperative creatures. They're not like individuals. Yes. You know what I'm saying? Like they still cooperate as a whole. When that cooperation stops being something that they need to have happen, right? Because they're not living in the wild, they're not living in a city where they have to, like work together to gather food and bedding and all that type of stuff, right? That same transaction applies.
It could be. And in order to identify this, I think we would need to do it with an asocial mammal. I would love to see data like that, where we can analyze the behavior of an asocial mammal. Here's two things I want to do. First, I need to get in touch with the psych or like an evolutionary sociology department because I want to do these experiments. But I want to do Mouse Utopia where they're allowed outside. They have like a pen outside with varying levels of real in that pen. So like they can go outside, the food and water is only outside. There's predators also outside that can eat them. So I want to see how much like reality they need in order to function. Another thing that I'd love to do is do it with naked mole rats, because naked mole rats are eusocial. So I want to know what happens if you place a eusocial mammalian species in that environment, if you get the same sort of breakdown. Um, because I do think that there's the flaw that we're running into in urban areas is more or less the same flaw that you get in Mouse Utopia.
Yeah.
And I don't know the specific causal origin of it. My current theory is that it's the same thing that causes AI model breakdown. There's an underlying principle there. Um, but if you do it with a non-social species, that's a good example of like a rodent that's not social at all that you could do this with. I don't know off the top of my head. Oh, like maybe
I
something that
mean, like
lays
you need to
eggs.
go like the Bengal cats or something. You know what I mean? Something that like kind of
Well, those would be
completely
a little
isolated
bit,
in the wild. You know what I mean? Has its own space. Bears, maybe.
yeah, something like that, or reptiles that lay eggs and then abandon them. That would be a good option. I mean, I can't think of a better one. Something where the frogs would be good. They abandon their young. You need one where the young are abandoned at an early age and develop purely instinctually. Um, because if they don't run into the mouse utopia problem, that means it's a social issue. Whereas if they do go through social collapse, even with a non-social species, that means it's a fundamental information issue. In either case, though, I don't think that women not having kids is related to the resource drain that kids represent. I think that it's something much more fundamental in terms of the way societies function. I think that most women do want kids. I also think that most women don't want to be the ones to hold responsibility for choosing to have kids. Just, they don't want to hold responsibility for a lot of things.
I mean, I don't know, like, because I've watched a lot of females in my lifetime, and I've noticed that like females tend to want children, right, with certain dudes, and they don't want children with other dudes.
Yeah.
Right? That tends to be how it works. And you can like trigger a female to want to have kids if the dude she wants to have kids with has kids with somebody else, right? These type of things. Like these are different types of problems as a whole. But like overall, as an in general thing, when you allow women to be able to be individualistic, right? If you allow them to be self-sufficient, they'll stop having children.
Um,
And that's what happened. Like that's literally that happened. You know what I mean? Like that's
yeah, I kind of side with you on that one. It's not that if you allow them to be self-sufficient, it's if you provide resources. If resources become free, they stop having children. Does appear to well, no, because you have people who live in like you have women that live in regions of like Africa where uh, hunter-gatherer resources are more than enough to support the local human population. And they're given free resources from, in the form of food aid from first world countries, and they still have kids.
I mean, yeah, but again that gets back to like the whole you know, generational thing, right? So the I think some of these are memes that are learned, right? Rather than like biological necessities. Like if you took that woman
I
from
think,
Africa, and it happens. Like you can take those women from Africa, right, and then you put them in a fucking city, right, in say France, right, and inside of 2 generations, they'll stop having fucking kids. They adopt the birth rate of like the host country.
yeah. So my thesis is that it's not resource dependent.
I mean, it's well, okay. So the hunter gatherers, the reason why the females have kids to the dudes is because that provides them with the resources, right? And then, that behavior is unlearned after a generation.
I don't think so. I think that I think that if a species is not reproducing, there's something wrong with it, is the premise that we need to start with.
Hmm. I mean,
Because
maybe.
from an evolutionary standpoint, if a species isn't reproducing, something has gone wrong. Okay.
No, like
So
this happened multiple times, right? You know what I
it
mean?
has
Like this,
happened multiple times
huh?
at varying levels. Well, it has happened multiple times in human history, and we're undergoing one of the worst demographic collapses ever, ever.
I mean, this is
Um,
global. The problem is it's global. It isn't the issue of, you know what I mean? Like, one city, right? Like Sparta started off with, like 20,000 Spartans. By the end of it, there was 5,000 of them. And they went, oh, it was war. And I'm like, yeah, but the women also stopped having fucking babies. Rome had the same problem happen, right?
yep.
Babylon had the same problem happen. Like, this Bronze Age collapse was also an overproduction of fucking elites, which led to like, women stopping having kids because they became egalitarian, right? This happens, right? And Germany and France and all these other places, like they have been in this demographic winter forever. This is not new.
That's true. It isn't new. But I think that we don't have a good understanding of the underlying reason for it. Again, because it clearly is not resource dependent, but it clearly relates strongly to urbanization.
Hmm.
And that's why my thesis is, again, that there's a fundamental problem in the way we are learning information about the way the world works, rather than there being in urban environments, rather than there being a inherent desire or lack of desire to have kids. Any species that's not having kids is broken. So we have to assume that there's a biological programming mechanism in there, and it's just very poorly adapted for urban environments.
Yeah. And I mean, we're not, yeah, we're terribly adapted for urban environments. Like it just is what it is. But like, yeah. So it's about 5 o'clock. We've been not streaming, recording for about an hour and a half now. I
Yep.
feel like we're not going to solve this problem, just me and
No,
you.
we aren't.
Like, I wish we
I need
could.
a whole psych department. I need a sociology department because I think we could rerun a bunch of the Calhoun experiments again,
Hmm.
over the course of like 5 or 10 years and really dig down to what specifically does it. Um, because naked mole rats are going to be the key to this, I think. Are you familiar with naked mole rats?
Not real, other than the one that was on Kim Possible back in the day. No, not at all.
All right, so naked mole rats are a really interesting species because they're mammals like mice, but they're eusocial like ants. So they like have a queen.
Okay.
Um, and so if it's fundamentally a social issue that causes this type of breakdown that you see in the Calhoun experiments, then the way naked mole rats interact with it should be fundamentally different than the way mice interact with it, because they have a hive structure. Um,
No,
they
that's
have
the
like,
problem. No, that's the problem, right? So, like, what you're doing is you're taking a basic social animal, right, and you're placing it into a hive, right? That's what a
yeah.
city is. A city is a hive.
And so the question then is, what happens if you take a hive species and put it into an artificial hive? Because ant colonies don't have this problem. You can put a little
Well,
pet ant
we already know
colony
what happens. Like bees, like it's the same thing. Bees happen. Like they'll just keep living, right? Because that's what it's
yeah,
used
it'll
to.
be fine. Hive species seem to be able to handle this, which is why I think naked mole rats are going to be one of the most interesting species to do this with, is because if they undergo a collapse, that means the problem isn't social. But if they don't, then the problem is social. And so we can isolate that specific variable.
Okay. Yeah. Listen, but we're gonna wrap this up,
Anyway,
man. Thank
so
you
yeah,
very
yeah, yeah.
much. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna be around later tonight, I'll be in my VC. You know how this works.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I get all excited about ideas like this.
Yeah, me
I
too.
think to close it up, I think we're going to be going through some radical social changes as a species. I think one of the major things that's going to come out of it is a form of much more militant Christianity in the Americas and in Europe, they're probably going to undergo like a full-scale cultural collapse in Western Europe and have to kind of rebuild from scratch. And in Eastern Europe, you're going to see endless conflict between Islam and Eastern Orthodox religion. So I think everything's going to be a mess for the foreseeable future, and the best place to be is probably the United States at this point.
I agree, man. That's why it is. You know, what I mean, that I stay in the Appalachians because I think the mountains have always like sheltered my people, and they will always shelter my people from now on. Like it is what it is.
Yeah. Appalachians are not people to mess with. Them and Ozarkistan. Ozarkistan's going to be interesting to follow.
I got some buddies down there. Believe it or not, I got some guineas from New York that went down there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
He fucking bought he bought a mountain, right? And he calls it Cavallari Mountain, right? He's like, yeah, come try me, right? He just sits and shoots raccoons all day long. It's fucking great.
Dude, what a lad. I want to be that guy when I grow up. When I'm in my 50s or whatever. You have a great day. Thank you for your time.
You too. Thank you, sir. It's appreciated. Later. All right.
Okay. I just turned off the recording.